War has always been brutal, but ancient history tells of events so shocking they still echo through time. From Alexander the Great's ruthless conquest of Tyre to the horrifying annihilation of Carthage by Rome and the Assyrians' terrifying rule, ancient wars were marked by acts that today would be deemed war crimes. These were not just battles, but relentless campaigns of fear, torture, and destruction, where empires imposed dominance with brutal tactics. Join us as we uncover the darkest chapters of ancient warfare, revealing the depths of human cruelty in the pursuit of power.
This is Sparta!
Relentless raids and devastation by the Vikings. The Viking Age, lasting from the late 8th to the early 11th centuries, is often associated with the Norse seafarers' reputation as fearless explorers and skilled traders. However, alongside this image lies a much darker narrative of merciless raids and widespread destruction that left a lasting mark on Europe. The Vikings were infamous for their brutal and often unexpected attacks, especially targeting vulnerable coastal settlements and monasteries across England, Ireland, and France. One of the most notorious Viking raids took place in 793 CE at Lindisfarne, a sacred monastery on the Northumbrian coast in England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes this event as a great slaughter, recounting how Norse warriors unleashed their fury on the defenseless monks. They looted treasures, destroyed holy relics, killed or enslaved the clergy, and set the site ablaze. This violent invasion sent shockwaves through Europe and marked the beginning of an era of relentless Viking aggression that would terrorize the continent for centuries. The effectiveness of Viking raids lay in their speed, unpredictability, and sheer violence. Viking longships, designed for swift movement and easy navigation through both open seas and narrow rivers, enabled raiders to strike with little warning. Their preferred strategy involved appearing suddenly on unsuspecting shores, where they would launch ferocious attacks on villages and religious sites. Many of these raids left entire communities decimated, with homes burned and villagers either captured as slaves or left in devastated ruins. The psychological impact of Viking attacks became just as feared as the physical destruction, as the sight of Viking sails on the horizon was enough to send towns into panic. The Viking approach to raiding was not solely motivated by the acquisition of wealth, but also by a desire to assert power and spread fear. Coastal communities, particularly in Britain and France, lived in constant dread of Viking invasions. Their fear was well-founded. Vikings were known to show no mercy to their victims. They looted and destroyed everything in their path, taking anything of value and leaving little behind but ashes and desolation. Even the religious sanctity of monasteries could not shield them from Viking brutality, as sacred sites became prime targets for their wealth and lack of defense. Although the Vikings were accomplished traders and craftsmen, their raiding legacy has cast a long shadow over European history. These raids altered the political and social landscape of many regions, as rulers scrambled to fortify defenses and create alliances against the Norse threat. For centuries, the Vikings remained a dominant force that could strike with terrifying precision, shaping European societies through both their cultural exchanges and their ferocious raids. In the end, the Vikings' brutal approach to conquest ensured their place in history as both fearsome warriors and a driving force of change during the medieval period. Their legacy of terror, conquest, and relentless ambition is still remembered today, and their impact is visible in the historical record of countless European communities that bore the brunt of their wrath. Unthinkable brutality of the Assyrian armies. The Assyrian Empire, reigning from the 10th to the 7th centuries BCE, is often remembered for its brutal methods of control and conquest. Dominating much of Mesopotamia, the Assyrians wielded extreme violence not only to subjugate enemies, but as a calculated method of psychological warfare. Known for their terrifying reputation, the Assyrian armies spread fear throughout the ancient Near East, relying on both their military strength and ruthless treatment of captives to maintain power. The accounts of their cruelty, as recorded by Assyrian kings themselves, reveal the extent to which terror was embedded in their approach to rule. Assyrian rulers like Ashurnasirpal II and Tiglath-Pileser III took pride in recounting their brutal deeds in inscriptions and palace records, preserving detailed accounts of the atrocities committed against those who resisted. Among the most infamous tactics was flaying, where captives were skinned alive. with the skins often displayed on city walls as a grim warning. This public display of suffering was intended to send a clear message to any who might consider rebellion. Another horrifying method involved impaling prisoners on spikes, leaving them to die in plain view of the inhabitants of conquered cities. These gruesome acts created an atmosphere of constant fear, discouraging defiance, and making an example of the Assyrian strength. Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, in his Bibliotheca Historica, documents the extent of Assyrian cruelty, recounting how they frequently cut off prisoners' limbs and left them to die slowly, serving as a nightmarish spectacle for those around them. In cities that dared to rebel, Assyrian forces responded with mass executions, often slaughtering thousands through beheadings or burning them alive in acts of extreme punishment. These displays of violence were intended not only to eliminate resistance, but also to psychologically crush any lingering hopes of freedom among the subjugated populations. This reign of terror held Mesopotamia in its grip for centuries, and the Assyrians seemed unstoppable. However, their ruthlessness also sowed the seeds of their eventual collapse. Over time, the Assyrian Empire amassed a long list of enemies who had suffered under its oppressive rule. By the 7th century BCE, resentment toward the Assyrians had reached a breaking point. A powerful coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians came together to end Assyrian dominance, leading to a coordinated assault on the empire's capital, Nineveh. This united front against the Assyrians succeeded in toppling the once mighty empire, finally putting an end to their brutal reign. The fall of Nineveh marked the collapse of the Assyrian Empire and symbolized the end of an era defined by fear and cruelty. Although the Assyrians had excelled in the art of war and psychological control, their tactics ultimately contributed to their downfall, as the oppressed peoples they ruled eventually rose up and dismantled the empire. The legacy of the Assyrians lives on in the historical record, serving as both a reminder of their military might and a cautionary tale about the limits of ruling through terror. The very fear they instilled in their enemies eventually turned against them, leading to their own undoing at the hands of those who refused to live under their brutal rule any longer. Widespread executions and early biological warfare by the Mongols. Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire, which extended across vast stretches of Asia and parts of Europe, is infamous for its staggering brutality, sweeping conquests, and use of terror as a psychological weapon. However, beyond the mass executions and destruction, the Mongols engaged in early forms of biological warfare that added an extra layer of horror to their campaigns. One of the most notable examples of this occurred in 1346 CE during the Siege of Kaffa, a Genoese-controlled port city in Crimea. After years of failed attempts to breach the city, the Mongol forces, under the command of a descendant of Genghis Khan, adopted a devastating new tactic, hurling the bodies of plague-infected soldiers over Kaffa's walls to spread disease among the defenders. This terrifying strategy forced the Genoese to flee, inadvertently carrying the deadly plague back to Europe. Many historians believe this event played a role in igniting the Black Death, the pandemic that ravaged Europe and Asia, claiming millions of lives. In addition to their biological warfare, the Mongols were known for mass slaughters in cities that resisted their rule. A particularly infamous episode took place in 1221 CE in the city of Nishapur, located in modern-day Iran. Following the death of one of Genghis Khan's sons-in-law during a local rebellion, the Mongol leader ordered a massive retaliation. According to the Persian historian Juvaini, Mongol soldiers killed every man, woman, and child in Nishapur as retribution, with the death toll estimated at an astonishing 1.7 million. This act of vengeance transformed Nishapur into a wasteland of corpses, a haunting symbol of the Mongols' merciless response to opposition. News of the massacre spread throughout the medieval world, creating an enduring image of Mongol cruelty. The Mongol Empire's campaigns of destruction and fear were not limited to Nishapur. Genghis Khan's generals, including his grandson Hulagu Khan, carried out similar atrocities throughout Central Asia, the Middle East, and into Eastern Europe. Cities that dared to resist were often razed entirely, their populations either slaughtered or enslaved. Those spared from death often faced lives of forced servitude, while the cities themselves were reduced to rubble, leaving behind stark reminders of the Mongols' wrath. Another grim aspect of the Mongol conquest was the widespread sexual exploitation of captured populations. Genghis Khan, along with his generals and soldiers, treated the conquest as an opportunity to seize women as war prizes, contributing to widespread sexual violence across the empire. Historian Giovanni recounts that after the fall of cities such as Nishapur and Merv, surviving women were taken by Mongol soldiers as rewards. Genghis Khan himself fathered an extraordinary number of children during his campaigns. This practice of taking women as spoils of war left a genetic legacy. It is estimated that around 16 million people alive today are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. The Mongol conquest thus left a legacy of devastation, not only through the destruction of cities and loss of life, but through a brutal impact on societies across Asia and Europe. The combination of biological warfare, mass slaughter, and exploitation created a legacy of fear that reverberated far beyond the empire's borders. While the Mongols did contribute significantly to trade and cultural exchange across the Silk Road, the methods they used to achieve their empire left scars that have endured in history. Their conquest reshaped entire regions, not only through physical destruction, but through a haunting psychological legacy that continues to resonate through accounts of their brutality. Alexander's ruthless destruction of Tyre. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great was steadily carving his way through the vast Persian Empire, using a combination of strategic brilliance and overpowering force to capture city after city. One of his most formidable obstacles emerged on the shores of modern-day Lebanon, the island city of Tyre. Known as the Queen of the Seas for its prosperity and renowned maritime strength, Tyre was a thriving and heavily fortified city that had withstood many sieges over the centuries. When Tyre's leaders refused to yield to Alexander's demands for surrender, they set the stage for one of his most astonishing and ruthless victories. Tyre's defenses presented a unique challenge for Alexander. The city, isolated on an island nearly half a mile from the coast, had formidable walls and a strong fleet that made any sea assault nearly impossible. But Alexander, relentless in his pursuit, devised an innovative and audacious plan that would leave an indelible mark on ancient military history. He ordered his forces to construct an enormous causeway, a man-made land bridge stretching from the mainland to the island. This massive engineering feat required months of grueling labor under constant enemy fire, with Macedonian soldiers working tirelessly to extend the path closer to Tyre's walls, despite relentless counterattacks from the Tyrians. Finally, after months of painstaking construction and violent skirmishes, Alexander's troops reached Tyre's defenses. With his forces positioned directly at the city's walls, Alexander's fury was unleashed in full. His soldiers broke through Tyre's fortifications, and a devastating onslaught followed. Over 6,000 Tyrian defenders were slain in the assault. For the surviving men, Alexander's retribution was severe. About 2,000 were crucified along the shoreline in a chilling display of dominance. According to ancient historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, these brutal executions were not merely punitive, but served as a powerful and terrifying message to other cities. A stark warning of the fate awaiting any who dared resist Alexander's rule. The remaining inhabitants, numbering approximately 30,000 and primarily consisting of women and children, faced a grim future as they were rounded up and sold into slavery. This brutal conquest sent shockwaves through the ancient world, and Tyre's fall underscored Alexander's resolve to crush opposition by any means necessary. The Siege of Tyre remains one of the most striking examples of his military ambition and the lengths he was willing to go to secure his empire. The savage destruction of Carthage. Carthage, once a bustling center of trade and culture on the North African coast, stood as Rome's most formidable rival. For centuries, the two great powers vied for supremacy in the Mediterranean, clashing in what became known as the Punic Wars. However, it was the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, that marked the grim finale of their rivalry and led to one of history's most chilling acts of annihilation. The Roman Senate, driven by the fervent conviction of statesman Cato the Elder, decided that Carthage posed too great a threat to Rome's ambitions. Cato's famous declaration, Carthago delenda est, which translates to "Carthage must be destroyed," solidified Rome's intent to erase Carthage from existence. The campaign to obliterate Carthage began with a grueling siege that lasted 3 years. By 146 BCE, the Roman forces had breached the walls of the city, and what followed was a methodical, brutal devastation. Carthage's defenders were met with overwhelming force, and the scale of destruction inflicted by the Romans was staggering. Ancient historian Polybius, who witnessed the aftermath, recorded that Roman soldiers went on a rampage, slaughtering civilians en masse. It is estimated that Carthage was home to around 700,000 people before the siege, but by the end, only about 50,000 survivors remained. These few were taken as prisoners, enslaved and dispersed throughout the Roman Empire, forced to serve the very power that had destroyed their homeland. Roman soldiers scoured Carthage, reducing buildings to rubble and setting fires that left the city in ashes. The horrors that took place within the city walls are vividly described by historians like Polybius and Appian, the latter documenting how the Romans showed no mercy to Carthage's final defenders. Unarmed civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, were mercilessly killed, a testimony to Rome's determination to ensure Carthage's complete extinction. Streets that had once thrived with commerce and culture were now littered with the bodies of the dead, and fires engulfed buildings, leaving a scorched landscape where Carthage had once stood. The destruction of Carthage was not only an act of war, it was a deliberate effort to obliterate an entire civilization. As Appian chronicled in Roman history, the cruelty displayed by Roman forces was profound. The Carthaginians' resilience, even in the face of such odds, did not deter Rome's unyielding mission. Roman soldiers were instructed to destroy every remnant of Carthage's prosperity to make sure that no trace of the once mighty city would remain to challenge Rome's supremacy. The utter destruction left Carthage as a haunting reminder of Rome's dominance and willingness to erase any potential threat. Polybius, who had traveled with the Roman army, wrote that the sight of Carthage's aftermath was among the most harrowing he had ever encountered. The city, once a beacon of culture and trade, was reduced to smoldering ruins, with not a single building spared. In the wake of this devastation, Rome's message was clear. Any force that dared defy its authority would face complete obliteration. The fall of Carthage stands as a stark illustration of the brutal extremes of ancient warfare. Rome's relentless campaign to eliminate Carthage did not simply defeat a rival city, it marked the erasure of a civilization. The systematic destruction and ensuing slavery of Carthage's people transformed the city's name into a symbol of obliteration. This was more than a conquest. It was an act of deliberate erasure, a lasting testament to Rome's imperial power and determination to rule unchallenged across the Mediterranean. In reflecting on these tales of ancient warfare, we glimpse the brutal lengths empires went to secure power and leave a lasting legacy, often a legacy of fear. From the Viking Raids and the Assyrians' infamous tortures, to the ruthless conquests of the Mongols, Alexander the Great, and Rome's obliteration of Carthage, these acts of terror reveal how humanity's thirst for dominance and control could sink to shocking depths. But these stories also serve as a somber reminder. While these empires once instilled fear across continents, most eventually fell, consumed by the very ferocity they unleashed on others. If you found this exploration into ancient war crimes intriguing, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest secrets. Let us know in the comments which historical event or figure you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.